Hey, Texas Values Facebook friends. Jonathan Science here, president of Texas Values. Great to be with you. We've got some really important updates. So we wanted to put this video together. We're going to have several members of our team that are going to be part of this. So give us some feedback. Let us know if you like this way that we're doing this. If you like this Texas Values update that we're starting right now, where you can see all of our faces on the screen or several members of our team. You know, there are now 12 members of the Texas Values team. We're excited that we've got people that were able to do our work and really spread the responsibility. And yesterday was a day where we need a lot of hands on deck. That's for sure, because some important announcements came out of the Attorney General's office by way of also the governor's office. And that's what the focus is going to be, is that churches have now been given the green light to reopen in the state of Texas. There was an Attorney General letter that came out, a guidance letter for churches, and that got a lot of attention. But there was a lot of news on some things in the state of Texas. The governor did a press conference earlier in the day. So you may not have seen this, or you might have seen this information where Texas has opened the door for churches now to have in-person services. And you might have saw it and thought, is that right? You know, I didn't realize that was going to happen, or, you know, it didn't get a lot of news earlier in the day. It came out about 3:30 or 4. So sometimes things get swept up in the news cycle when they come out later in the day. But we did put something out. We put out a press statement, put something out on social media, but we're already getting feedback from a lot of people. So we felt it was important to get into some of the detail. And I was so excited about this announcement, I had to virtually put myself into, you know, one of the churches that I attend sometimes, which is close to our office, in my background. And so if I could be there right now, if I had, you know, logistically planned for this, you know, I might have tried to make that happen. But nonetheless, the focus is on what happened yesterday from the Attorney General's office. There's a guidance letter. It's getting swept up a little bit in my screen here, but you can go to our website, txvalues.org. You can download or just click that link. It's right there front and center on our homepage, so you can hear more about it. So let me just let you know who's going to be on this video call with us. We've got Jonathan Covey, Director of Policy for Texas Values, Mary Elizabeth Castle, Policy Advisor for Texas Values. That they're going to talk a lot more about the policy legal side and the application of this new church guidance letter. And then we've got Judah Atkinson and also Pastor Jorge Tovar, who do work for Texas Values on our church and pastor outreach project. They're going to talk about more from the practical side and what's happening with churches that are already starting to make adjustments and plans for what they're going to do next. And getting a lot of phone calls and emails on this because people are wanting to know. So this is about a 2.5-page document. And so, you know, one of the things that I think we want to start with is a key difference in this guidance letter versus what we saw before, which is now that the Attorney General's office, and this is based on GA-16 as it's being called. This was the governor's executive order on April 17th. So this was effective immediately. So really starting Friday, but it certainly helped when the Attorney General's office came out with a guidance letter. But it's 2.5 pages long. It continues to reiterate that churches are providing essential services. And then a key element is language that the Attorney General's office had before, saying that churches must do this, or they must not meet in person, and with some very rare exceptions and limited numbers. Those have all changed, been softened, and been removed. Now what you see is a series of recommendations, and common sense recommendations, but you no longer see anything in there that's suggesting that you can't meet in person. As a matter of fact, there's specific guidance on that saying when you meet in person, here's how to do it. And that's a key element in there. I want to bring in Jonathan Covey, our Director of Policy. You've been working on this issue along with us, helping give people good insight and guidance. We've seen a lot of conflict with local governments in other parts of the country, but particularly in Texas, we've seen a lot of questions, even though none have gone to court. And so now we're a week and a half after Easter, and now churches are an ability to start having in-person services. But the guidance letter doesn't require, and that's the key element, right? This now simply just puts us in a position where the government is not prohibiting churches for deciding how to handle things now that we're dealing with the coronavirus now 4 or 5 weeks, and, you know, maybe starting to see some signs of encouragement and things to be optimistic about.
Right, Jonathan. Yeah, and it's easy to be confused because we had this is the second guidance letter that's come out. The first one was back in early April, and it talked about how some large churches should avoid gatherings. But this one came out, and it kind of, like you said, it kind of softened the language as we're looking through and talking about, instead of that churches must avoid gatherings or must try to have remote services. It talks about how we're recommending how it should. And some of the things they said were, basically, we encourage you to try to implement social distancing practices, and each church needs to decide for itself based on the age of the members, based on other factors involved, whether or not they should try to have in-person services. But some of the things that they recommended were encouraging attendees who are 65 and above to stay home and watch services online, maybe even providing senior services, asking attendees who have underlying health risks to stay at home and watch services online, making sure that ushers and greeters and people who come in contact with a lot of the public have and are equipped with gloves and masks, and consider keeping childcare closed unless there's some way you can specifically comply with the CDC recommendations. These are all things that that you would want to consider and you would want to balance as you're kind of going through and making that determination. But the bottom line is that they're saying that we're getting out of the way. Government is getting out of the way. Now it's up to the churches to make a decision as to whether or not it's time for them to be meeting in person or not.
Well, and hey, and that's a good, way to start off this conversation. Programming note for the members of our team, because many of these videos we've done, it's been one person's been on the screen if you're not talking. And so if you're not talking, you're seen as off screen. We put the technology together and I believe we're all on the screen. So just giving my team a heads up, because I know I had to scratch my nose there for a minute. A good reminder, though, we're all on the screen. And a lot of adjustments during this process. And so that's part of what we're trying to do at Texas Values. We're working from home, we're practicing social distancing, all those things, but we're also looking at, things moving in a direction where people are asking things to open back up and really even just started putting a plan in place and make preparations to open up. And one of the key things of doing that is being able to know, is government going to be in the way of what I think I should do or not? Is the government going to fine me like some of these people in some other states that got a $500 ticket on Easter? Or is the government now going to trust and let me rely on my freedom and my prudence? I want to bring Mary Elizabeth Castle, policy advisor for Texas Values, in. Two other key elements of the guidance letter. Number one, on page 1, in the third paragraph, and again, this is on txvalues.org. You can get this document from the Attorney General's office, guidance for houses of worship during the COVID-19 crisis. But we've been asked this a lot. What about these local orders that are still in place? At the end of paragraph 3, it says, to the extent that there is a conflict between the governor's executive order GA-16 and local orders, GA-16 controls. Local governments may not order houses of worship to close. And the other thing that's in here, that recommendation to not have gatherings of 10 or more, that's gone. Mary Elizabeth, those are some key differences. And that's why you saw headlines and information we put out that Texas has given the green light for churches to start reopening.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think a lot of people, before this was actually put out, were a little confused about what they could and could not do when churches were made essential. A lot of people thought, well, my city or my county still says that 10 or more people can't meet. Well, finally, the governor, attorney general, they have made it clear that the governor's new order that we're talking about today actually overrules any local or county ordinance about the limit of 10 people or more for these religious services. But just like Jonathan Covey said, there's still these requirements that you want to take just for precaution whenever you're meeting with 10 or more people in your religious services. So making sure that family units stay together and that there's separation between family units and individuals and other family units, and just making sure that people are washing their hands, sick church employees are staying home, making sure that, of course, if they have underlying health conditions, they're not coming to the service. But at the same time, this makes that if you're having parking lot services, those are completely fine. And, like we saw in Mississippi, where a pastor was actually ticketed and fined for his parking lot service. That won't happen in Texas under this governor's order, because a parking lot service completely falls under these guidelines that are in this new order.
Well, and look, a lot of information is moving quickly. I think what I might have heard you say on one of these things, that many of these bullet points are requirements. And I know we were talking about this earlier. These are recommendations. And sometimes they can seem that way, right? They're bullet points. So it seems like the Attorney General is saying you have to do this. They're recommending that people do this, and they are requiring people, and I think that maybe was what you were getting at. They're requiring people, or they're encouraging them to follow additional guidance from the White House and CDC whenever possible. So I'll make sure people understand the points that we're making here on this, because these are important details, right? And so, because a lot of feedback we've gotten, that's what people think is, oh, now I have to do it this way. The Attorney General is saying, this is what we recommend. These are good best practices. And so, and I think that's what a lot of people are looking for. Okay, so if I do it this way, then I'm really following what the state, the state's highest law enforcement officer, as the Attorney General's called, is recommending. And that is clear in this. And so it's good to have some guidance, not just, hey, now it's up to you. Along with that, some clear guidance on what could be best practices on these issues. And some of these things that we're already doing, and you already see other businesses doing when it comes to these issues, but a lot of good detail in here. And we'll go over a little bit more of that in just a minute. But, you know, and it's very detailed too about, I like the parts about ensure attendees sit with their family unit, right? So you go there as a family, you can sit together, but that you should look for social distancing, or, you know, have some space between those family units. So you might go there and you don't have to sit 6 feet away from your child. Some people might want to sometimes, you know, but they get a little out of control. But the government, the big picture here is the government's no longer requiring you to do it, but they're still telling you, here's what probably is a good way to handle this. And part of it is where they say in page 2, houses of worship should help the slow of spread of the virus. So they suggest that if you do the drive-in or drive-through services, or you practice a lot of these social distancing methods as churches can now start to reopen, there's a good way to do it. But to your point too, Mary Elizabeth, a lot of churches, I think, just decided we're just going to close. We don't want to make a mistake. We're not sure exactly how to do, so we're not going to open our doors at all. And so this hopefully will give them some comfort that they can start to reopen immediately. That's the effect of the order. They might want to do what a lot of churches doing. They're starting to develop a plan moving forward. I want to bring in Judah Atkinson and also Pastor Tovar. We'll start with ladies first. Judah Atkinson and Pastor Tovar are, they lead our church and pastor outreach work across the state of Texas. Judah Atkinson is in the North Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth area. Judah, you've been on several calls that we've done, and with other folks that are concerned about these issues or care about these issues across the state. Tell us a little bit about, you know, how you're seeing this and feedback that you're already starting to get as this information's now been out there for 24 hours.
I think pastors are excited, but they're also very cautious. You know, they don't want to be part of a new outbreak of it. So I think they're taking their time to implement and put guidelines that are recommended into actually so that they'll go well on a Sunday when they open up, and really just, you know, getting people trained. And so most of them are taking 2 to 4 weeks to even think about opening up again and what that would look like. Even simple things as communion and taking up an offering and greeting people and dismissing them so that they all don't head out the door at once. And so these things are things I think pastors are concerned about. And, but I think they're excited. I think they, you know, we want to open up, we want to be back, and we want to connect with people again.
I want to bring Pastor Jorge Tovar from the Laredo area onto our call. And give me the thumbs up, James, if you can still hear me. I think I sensed a little change in my communications. Drop that in the comments. Let me know. Good. All right. You can still hear me. So Pastor Tovar is pastor of Jordan River Church down in Laredo, but does work in South Texas for Texas under our church and pastor outreach project. He also did a lot of events called Keep God in Texas, made a lot of new friends over the past year and a half, I'm sure. But he was having church services, really trying to balance some of the CDC guidelines, particularly on Easter. And the past couple of weeks, from the back of a trailer, I think he even got a really neat picture in one of the local newspapers down there. But Pastor Tovar, you've been in the middle of practicing this as well as trying to encourage other pastors and church leaders. And you were on the invitation-only private call we had with a select group of about 15 pastors and church leaders yesterday when this news was just coming out. Tell us a little bit about what your experience has been and what you think you're going to see from yourself and other churches as we move forward with this new information.
Right. a lot of churches, like I did for the past time of the crisis, since the mandatory shutdown and all that, shelter in place. I mean, they kept on functioning as churches, and so they're already in practice of the social distancing and the mask and the gloves. So, but there's a lot of churches that just went straight online, and though anxious to reopen their churches, and that's the calls that I've been getting lately with this new GA16. Okay, what could, does it mean that we can go have services again? So I've been explaining. In fact, this afternoon I'll have a Zoom meeting with several of the pastors that have been calling, and I'll be able to explain. Hopefully they can join us live on Facebook right now. But that's what I've been getting. They're anxious. They're ready. They want to go back into the normality of having their services. Yet we still encourage them to practice the social distancing. And all those guidelines that are the CDC put out and all that. So yes, we are excited, and the consensus is that they want to do it. But they want assurance that they're going to do the right thing, and they don't want to cross over the line and not do and do something that is completely wrong. So yes, we're ready. We're ready to go.
Well, we're talking with members of the Texas Values team about the big news yesterday from the Attorney General's office, new guidance letter for houses of worship that make it clear that churches now have the green light to reopen, and you're no longer going to have the government prohibiting you from doing that. And I think that might require a little bit of reset for people as we navigated this area, this space we've never been before. And we had some discussion about this on this call yesterday, this call we had with some key pastors and leaders from across the state as this news was coming out, and some confusion at times from wondering what you're supposed to do, what you're allowed to do, but also at the same time trying to be, a positive voice and example for the community and not take unnecessary risk. But one of the things we heard was some reminders of some of the services that churches provide and some of the value that it has when people are going to church in person and those connections, and not just a regular church service, but the impact it's had on certain ministries that relate to family and family interactions and the real support network that can provide. And we heard from a few pastors that have had concerns. And not only that, you got to remember, people have lost their jobs. 22 million people, I think, have filed for unemployment, or those were some numbers earlier this week. So there's been a lot of stress in people's lives. And a lot of times when they have that stress or they have that concern, many of them will go to church, or that outlet of church on Sunday, or that regular practice is something that they count on to really help them center their lives or focus on something that gives them something to be hopeful for. Sometimes it's just being able to go inside your church and sit and pray. I know that's something that I've done a lot over the years, and people felt like they've lost the right to do that, or at least they've had to be understanding about that. And so I think that's good feedback to remind people the role that the church plays. But many churches, just the overwhelming percentage, really trying to step back and accept that. But now we're 4 to 5 weeks into this. We're starting to see, at least in Texas, the numbers are not going to be as concerning as we thought. The governor had some really good information about that over the past 10 or 12 days, that the numbers were decreasing. And not that we want any loss of life, but the death rate, it is a very small percentage compared to other parts of the state, if not the best in the state of Texas. So some prudent reasons to say, okay, maybe we can start moving in this direction again, and people being able to have access to those things that do help them in times that are still going to be stressful for many of us, because it's not completely over and having to deal with the repercussions of this. But I want to go back to the House of Worship Guidance Letter again. And I want to stress, if you're just joining our video, share the video. We're going to be on for a few more minutes. Share it on Facebook, other social media channels that you can, or forward this in an email. We want people to get this information. Let's go back to page 1, because this, I think, is going to be something that's going to come up a lot. How does this relate to local services and local governments? So again, on page 1, paragraph 3 at the end, local governments may not order houses of worship to close. I'm reading those words directly from this guidance letter. GA16, as it's referenced in this letter, that is the governor's executive order from last Friday that did have a reference in churches. to churches. But this letter is specifically about more details for the churches. And at the beginning of it, it says this updated joint guidance from the Office of the Attorney General and the Office of the Governor is the official guidance regarding the effect of Executive Order GA-16 on religious services conducted in churches, congregations, and houses of worship. And so I think it's key for people to know that the authority and the weight of this. But let's go into a little bit of the guidance again. If you go to to page 2 and 3, that is where language was in there before that talked about recommending not having events that were 10 or more. That's been removed. That language is no longer in there. Instead, you see language about how to handle in-person attendance. And so, and it specifically says on page 2, where it talks about people that are 65 or more, it talks about when people are attending in person. It talks about how ushers and greeters should handle things, how childcare should be handled. And so I just want to stress a little bit more on that detail. It talks about passing of collection plate. Consider refraining from passing collection plates and instead provide a central collection box in the building or encourage online giving. Consider how the sacraments can be administered without attendees having to touch the same surfaces and objects. These are all details that relate to when you have services in person, like most of us are used to eliminate any doubt. I want to bring Jonathan Covey back in, our director of policy. We had this call yesterday with pastors. And so we want to make it clear, this is not to suggest, again, that you're required to now, that the churches have to. It removes that barrier that existed before, and no longer is the government going to punish you or you be prohibited, and really puts us back to where we typically exist, because the government, churches, they're on private property. They have very strong constitutional rights.
Right. Yeah. And to your point before, Jonathan, about how it was the language softened, I want to go back to the very first guidance letter that was issued. One of the very last paragraphs said, some houses of worship must avoid large gatherings. And then that paragraph was replaced with one now that says, down here at the bottom, houses of worship should help slow the spread of the virus. So there's a very distinct difference. And they're saying, we have to do our part. We have to contribute and try to help to slow this virus. But we're taking a step to the side. We're moving out of the way, and churches now need to balance that risk. And just at the very last paragraph, it talks about under extraordinary circumstances, which we temporarily live, these guidelines provide houses of worship may remain open. Guidelines make only recommendations to houses of worship. And they don't violate the religious liberty because there's a compelling interest, and this is the least restrictive means available. They're recommending different things like refraining from passing collection plates, like having families sit together in family units. But they're not telling the churches or the houses of worship to do anything. And I think that's the key takeaway from this.
Yeah, well, and that's what's helpful for a lot of people too, because they're going to want to know, okay, I'm a little maybe cautious about doing this, but if I do it this way, at least I know I'm following to the letter or specific guidelines that the Attorney General's office and the governor's office have given their blessing to, if I can use that word in this context, of the best way to do that. And I think that's very helpful as well, because I think it meets a lot of people where they are, knowing that while the churches may want to open, they also may want to be responsible and to take common sense measures, so they're not left guessing too. Well, if I do this, is it okay? If I do that, is it okay? And so now they've got some really good detail. And I want to invite, if there are any questions, to post those in the comment section and see if our communications associate James Solik can forward those, and we'll see them. We'll try to answer some of those. But even after this call, if you don't already get our email, go to txvalues.org, sign up for our email. You can send us an email at info@txvalues.org. If you got specific questions about this, we're already getting some of those. We'd be happy to answer them, because look, this is 24 hours for us too. It's news, so we can imagine what it's like to people that don't live in this space, so to speak, on a regular basis, on a day-to-day basis, like we do. So we're continuing to read through this. We're continuing to get feedback, and we want to provide that guidance. Mary Elizabeth Castle, I want to bring you in. You've been doing some work handling a lot of the legal analysis for this issue and other issues along the way. My impression has been that when we've been able to provide that information, it's been a source of comfort and encouragement for people because, you know, they're not looking to be defiant. They want to follow the law, but they have legitimate things that they've been doing and services that they've been trying to meet for people that need them.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I guess a good example of that was the pregnancy resource centers that were providing services to people. I actually had a call with one the other day, or actually yesterday, with one that I volunteer with, and they were just relieved to know that, you know, they can legally serve people in the time of need. So it's a lot of comfort, I can imagine, to churches to know that there's legal backing up for them too, that they can have these services also and serve their communities if they follow these guidelines. And like Jonathan said, you know, churches aren't forced to open. I know my father pastors a church up in North Texas, but he's 77 years old and has a congregation that has a lot of health issues. So he might take some time, you know, to open up. But I think for churches where, you know, there's a young, vibrant crowd and there aren't so much concerns with older people or people with health conditions, it's reassuring to know that, you know, they have some legal backing so they won't, you know, get in trouble. And it's just comforting to know that, you know, Texas Values can provide that type of resource.
Well, and the other thing too, you have a lot of churches that maybe were smaller. They didn't have a lot of technology that some are using. They weren't ready. They weren't prepared, and it wasn't their fault. But no one saw this coming, and so things hit, and then they're scrambling to try to figure things out. And they're not used to having big crowds anyway. So maybe it didn't impact them as much as it relates to the letter of the law, but they were just being prudent and really not doing anything that would have put people at risk. And so now they've got freedom too. But yeah, to your point, people, they can decide on their own now of how to adjust and whether or not there's, you know, they feel like their audience, so to speak, is a little bit more of a risk, and maybe they'll wait. And that's what's really encouraging about all this, is it resets things so people know you're not required to do anything. You're not suffering under a threat of punishment. And now you get to decide. And that's where many of us really prefer to be, is to not have the government in a position of forcing us to do some of these things, even though temporarily many of us have been understanding in light of the very serious nature of what's been going on with the coronavirus. But we know it was tough after Easter weekend. And I think that's where a lot of people too started thinking a little bit more, can we find a way to balance some of these interests? And some of that's related to the economy as well, right? A lot of concerns about the impact on the economy, and maybe we can find a better balance as we move forward. And so timing, I feel like, really made a lot of sense, and something that I think will be encouraged. I want to let Judah and Pastor Tovar come in for just a minute or so before we conclude. You know, we move forward. We've got a lot of churches that are connected with the work we do, but we're continuing to want to be an outreach to them. And that's something that we'll continue to, even though we're not, you know, moving around the state like we used to. We're trying to email people, phone calls, but provide analysis. And so we're hoping this will be information that a lot of the churches will enjoy. And it seems like through some of y'all's travels before and virtually these last month, that you've been able to connect with a lot of new people that seem to see value in what we're doing. And, you know, particularly during this time, are looking for answers to sometimes some very complicated questions.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that there, I believe that there is going to be local governments resisting, and churches are going to be going through these, if I should say, trials. Just bear with the experience, and I guess we can reach out and try to help them out. You know, but we are doing what the law is allowing us to do. Our church is ready for service this Sunday. We've been having services that drive-in services, and we hadn't used our building because, you know, me personally, I went into replacing tile and doing some work inside the church, so it wasn't fit to open anyway. But we'll be ready this week, just in time. I didn't know, but just in time. I wanted to open the doors to be an essential place for the people, just to, like Jonathan mentioned this earlier, just to people sit there and pray and thank God and just sing a song, you know. But there are going to be churches that are going to have feel resistance from the local government. You know, reach out to us if we can help in any way we can. But just press on forward. You know, let's continue working and follow the guidelines. Just be cautious about everything, and remember to keep everything clean, and God will just give us the victory, and pretty soon we'll be back to normality, if you will, if I can say that, so that's I wanted to share that too.
Well, and before we bring Judah in, I was asked a question, and I want to make sure I answer it. Well, we were asked a question, and that was, what does this look like for churches this Sunday? And I think kind of what the question is being asked is, can churches open up this Sunday? The governor's executive order and the attorney general's executive analysis, along with the governor, is effective immediately. So if churches want to open up and practice these recommendations, that all can start this Sunday. It's not required to, and we're not going to pressure churches to do that either. We want to make sure we're being clear about that. We want to respect the fact of churches trying to balance this, but our role is to let people know that now we're back to where we are, and that freedom exists without threat of punishment for the government. I think that's been a concern for some people. They want to make sure that they're being a good, person in their community, and they're trying to be responsible. And so, but if they wanted to, it's already in effect. I mean, and so that's the effectiveness legally of the guidance letter, but also the executive order, which was signed actually last Friday. But we didn't have this analysis until this week. And I think it's good to have this analysis and not just rely on the wording of the governor's executive order. Judah, you've been talking to a lot of people in the Dallas-Fort Worth area as part of our church and pastor outreach project. Look, there are a lot of things coming up soon too. I mean, while churches are going to reopen, people are going to need that support. There's a lot of things coming up soon, whether it's local elections, whether it's statewide elections, whether it's, how people are going to start adjusting this summer, to these changes, things with their kids, a lot of things that, relating to that churches services they provide, but also a part that they play in the community. And, and people may be coming to the pastors with a lot of these questions. Hey, I read this on Texas Values website, and so I would imagine we want to encourage them to get in touch with you and Pastor Tovar from the church aspect, not just on this issue, but on things that people care about moving forward.
Exactly, and we're excited to be reaching out to them and helping them make decisions. Well, we're not really helping them make decisions, but for our smaller churches, opening up on Sunday seems, really easy. For our church, we meet in a high school, so, that's not going to happen. Those are some of the other issues, but we are really wanting to reach out and be a resource to our pastors, and would encourage them to contact us if they have any questions.
Absolutely. And you can send an email to info@txvalues.org if you've got any more questions or comments about some of these issues related to this church guidance letter that came out yesterday, or some of the other work that we're doing. We've been very active as it relates to issues on the pro-life and the court case where the abortion industry has sued the state of Texas because they want to be the only medical group opened up. And some of those things that happened, that's been victorious. A very important parental rights case that we filed a brief in today at the Texas Supreme Court. If you didn't see our write-up about that, some really good information there. I watched the oral argument. I think Mary Elizabeth from our team also did as well. And I thought parental rights, and particularly the role that the state played, and some of our other friends, was represented well. Some good interaction with the Texas Supreme Court. We'll see how that issue goes. But as our team continues to grow and get into other issues and be more active, that's just more reason why, if you can, we need your support. If you can make a tax deductible donation to the work that we do, we're coming up on the end of our fiscal year at the end of June. So you can make a donation at txvalues.org. If you like the work that we do for faith, family, and freedom in the state of Texas. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we know a lot more people are struggling these days than they were a month ago, and we're sensitive to that. So if there's any amount that you can give, or you've got to take a break for a while, we get that. But if you're one of those people out there that do have an ability to support us financially, we need your help, as the call and the insight and the need for our work has really not changed. And in some ways, it's grown a little bit. We're trying to meet those needs, and we can do a better job of doing that if you can support the work that we do financially at txvalues.org. So thanks for joining us on this Facebook Live, the members of our team, Mary Elizabeth Castle, Jonathan Covey, Judah Atkinson, Pastor Jorge Tovar. And we actually have a really interesting update that we're going to have on Friday. I don't think I can tell you the details yet, but you're going to want to check your email. And if you haven't signed up for the txvalues.org email. Go to txvalues.org, get our weekly email sign up, because I think that's going out later today. We got a special guest that we believe we're going to have on Friday that's going to have a lot to say and is very important to some of these issues in the state of Texas. So don't miss that. That's likely to be Friday afternoon. But we'll continue to have updates on our social media channels, our website, and through other methods so we can continue to protect faith, family, and freedom here in Texas. Talk to you again soon.